Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Really
Very
don't
sexy voice.
Yeah. It is, isn't
Yeah.
it? I wonder who she is.
Keep company after a while.
Yeah.
No one's ever said
Okay
that.
then, gentlemen. Shall we start? Are you ready to start, Mark?
I am. Let me just share my screen then.
Okay. Well, Mark Beasley's MW0RZS is going to talk to us tonight about software-defined radio, the past and the present. Now, I advise you to mute your mics, otherwise you get all sorts of horrible noises going over when Mark's speaking. So if you can do that for us, and I'm sure it'll be appreciated. We can see that, all right, Mark. It looks like a little island.
Great. That's brilliant. It is. Don't ask me where it is.
Well, it's Anglesey, actually. When all the tourists are on it, that's how big it becomes. It sinks.
Most probably is. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for spending time with me today. I'm sorry if it seemed like I'm rushing around or rushed in, but I did literally rush in. So I had this prepared a while back, and I wanted to talk to you tonight really about SDR. But when I produced this presentation, I actually produced it for the course and for a course at the time. So it is a basic introduction to SDR. So I'm not so sure that I've completely met the brief, because you wanted me to talk about where we are and what the future holds. But I think I'm quite happy to talk about what the future might hold, as far as I'm concerned, certainly in my opinion, with SDRs. And it'd be good to get your opinion as well about where you think SDRs are going. So I did originally present this as a way of sort of giving people an overview of what SDR is, because a lot of people are still unsure about what it is and why it's there. So I thought I would do that. So if this doesn't quite meet the brief, I do apologise, but I think it does, mostly anyway. So let me share this. So it's a basic introduction to SDR. That's a picture of quite an oldish radio now. It's probably about 10 years old, but it was one of the very first black box type radios that was produced at the time, and it was, still quite iconic. You can find one of them around. So I just wanted to talk to you folks about this. What is SDR? Well, it stands for software defined radio, and the key to software defined radio is really to say, to begin with, that it's no different to any other radio. It still transmits more or less in the same way. It still produces more or less the same RF signal eventually, but there are some subtle differences with the way in which the circuitry, and certainly, if you like, the box itself operates. And I think there's probably more advantages to this than disadvantages, but it does depend where you guys come from. So in the early days, SDR was quite clunky. It was probably lots of external sort of drives or external components that had to be switched into your existing architectural radio, whereas compare that to where we are right now, that isn't the case at all. You can go off and you can buy yourself quite a nice, tidy, neat little SDR radio if you've got quite a bit of cash, but we'll come to that in a moment. And some of them can fit in your pocket. Whereas probably 15 years, maybe 10, 12, 15 years ago, maybe a bit earlier than that, a bit later than that, you weren't able to do that. You'd have to go off and you'd have to buy lots of external components to switch into your existing radio. In terms of what it actually does, is it takes a signal that's received. Well, if you think about receivers and transmitters, really, it receives an RF signal that someone has sent to you, and then it converts that signal from RF into digital form. And the circuitry or the architecture of your radio, depending on what type of radio you've got, will do that in lots of different ways. It depends a lot on how sensitive your radio is, what type of SDR radio you've got, and to some extent as well the age of the circuitry, because some of it is, you might have quite an oldish radio which is a little bit less sensitive than some of the much more modern SDRs, and then reconverts it into RF before it's sent out through, if you're transmitting out through your antenna. And so there are lots of advantages. Some people will tell you that there's more advantages on the receive side than there is on the transmit side. A lot of that actually depends upon what type of antenna system you're using as to whether that's true or not. I've got lots of colleagues, lots of friends. In fact, one who did a talk for us on here, Andrew, G0RVM, who uses SDRs. He has for the past 15 years and can spend quite a lot on his. And he would say to you that he would argue that, you know, his transmit signal is much more clean and much more effective than a traditional signal, and his receive is much more sensitive and much more able to do what he wants it to do, which some of which I'm going to go through in a little while. So with SDR, one or more parts of the RF spectrum is simultaneously converted from RF into digitized form. And when it's converted from digitized form, it's then cleaned. I mean, the best way to put this is it's cleaned up. It's spurious emissions, if there are any in the signal, are removed. Some extra lifts can be put in, so you can obviously you can amplify some of the parts of the signal that you want amplified. You can remove some of the unwanted background frequencies that have been mixed and therefore reduce the noise to signal ratio, or you can improve the signal to noise to signal ratio. And a lot of, as it says here, a lot of the heavy lifting of that is done with very effective and efficient, what's the best way of putting it, circuits, electrical circuits that will look very similar to your computer. So your computer CPU at home, the CPU in this Mac that I'm using tonight, the CPU in your Mac at home or your Windows machine or whatever it is you're using, it's not dissimilar. It's not that dissimilar. If you look at, you took the cover off and look at the circuitry in it, look at the breadboard, look at the components in it, wouldn't look terribly different. And all that heavy lifting, that the same thing that your computer does when it controls all the programs, runs all the programs, runs all the software, and does all of that, is done inside your radio. So all that heavy lifting is done, and it's not done by traditional circuitry that you find in a traditional radio. Now, I'm going to try and move you out of the way a minute, because that's it. I can't read some of my stuff. So you will get some types of radios where some of the IF mixing is still done traditionally, and then it's fed back into digitized form, and others where it's not. And that, again, that will just depend upon the type of radio you happen to have. Chief, I think, there are many ways of looking at this, but chief amongst them, I think, in terms of differences, is the way in which the signal, when it's, I'm just going to talk about receive for a minute, but also transmit, but receive mostly, is filtered. And when it's transmitted, how it's modulated, and how that software within your programmable DSP will cope with that. So it has got, as you'll see from slides that come a bit later, it's got a lot of advantages in terms of what you want to do with your signal, where you want to transmit it. Over traditional radios, it does have a lot more of an advantage because of the sensitivity and the selectivity of SDR. even smaller, or they can be, you know, that sort of size. They were originally much bigger than that, and they didn't actually at one point look much smaller than your normal size radio, but they have, lots of things have changed. I'll come back to that slide in a moment. Whoops. So this is essentially a diagrammatic form of how it works. So your signal arrives, your analog domain, so your traditional part of your radio deals with the analog signal, and it converts that here into a digitized form. So it takes the analog signal, converts it into a digital form, and in here it cleans up. In other words, it sort of cleans the signal up, it refreshes the signal, it adds things to it, takes things out of it, and essentially what you've got, as I said, is this multi-purpose computer that does that job for you. So it doesn't operate in quite the same way as a normal radio would, and it avoids having a VFO because it can instead it can slot the frequencies rather than having to tune onto them. It can almost bypass the IF conversion because it can do that by a different mixing system compared to a traditional one. And obviously in a traditional radio where you have RF signals, you don't necessarily in these radios need bandpass filters because that problem doesn't exist. Okay, but one of the things it will need, which a lot of early radios didn't have, is in order to cope with the way in which that happens, it needed to have a really fast processing time. And a lot of the early radios wouldn't allow that to happen very easily. Sorry, I've got to keep moving you because I can't seem to move you guys out of the way so I can read the rest of the slide. Where you get a lot of high data rates, so a lot of high transmission rates coming through the radio, the conversion from ADC into DAC wasn't fast enough, and so it was losing. It could potentially lose those signals and being passed on to the next part of the radio fast enough. So more modern radios will allow a much faster DSP or much faster processing rate, and the faster you've got, the more sensitive and the more accurate the data that's converted is, and therefore the more cleaner the signal at the other end. So that's in kind of really simple terms how it works. So it's taking a traditional signal in, converting it into a digitized form, sending it into the next part of the radio that then converts it back to an RF signal, so that into an analog signal so that you can hear it. Okay, so why, I'll come back to a bit of that in a moment if you've got any questions on it. So why SDR? Why did we choose SDRs? Well, there's several reasons for that, and it does depend who you talk to. But for me, it's because of its selectivity and because of its capability, and some of the more traditional radios don't have that level of filtering. It won't allow you to clean your signal up to the level at which an SDR radio can. So, for example, I mentioned G0 RVM Andrew the other day, or a minute ago. So when I first saw his setup, his SDR setup, he was receiving a signal, or he wanted to receive a signal, I think it was on 40 meters, and he was able to attenuate everything around him, pull out that sort of, attenuate the signal, and damp everything around him so that he could literally just take that signal and amplify that signal, and much more cleanly than a notch filter could, and almost redigitize that. That's what it was. It was redigitizing that signal that he wanted from that station. So it was almost, to listen to it from an audio point of view, it was almost as if that was the only station on that band at that particular time, which it wasn't, because there were other stations around him, or around them, but you wouldn't have thought so. And that's essentially what that digital system is allowing you to do, because you are able to, you have that capability. So the other problem with just a traditional box, if you like, is that if every time you want to sort of change something or upgrade something or replace the circuitry in it, to enable it to be more efficient or more effective, then obviously the only thing you can really do is add either another part to it, add another piece of circuit to it, take a piece out, add a piece in, or have an external component plugged in. Really, that's your only capability, you know, or just sell the radio and change it. That's the only thing you can do. The ability of a software program is that it can just be downloaded. It can be your firmware, for example, which is your software that you're using on your radio uses, can simply just be downloaded and then uploaded, or you can swap a piece of software in much the same way as you can on your laptop or your computer at home or something like that. It's as simple as that. And a lot of the newer, all the newer radios these days have that capability. They don't, say to you, well, you can upgrade. I mean, I've said before many times, I use my Icom 7300, and I wouldn't swap them for toffee, but some people have upgraded it to the latest Icom radio. I don't really need to, but I could. But any software upgrades for that radio, I just have to look online, plug them in and download them. The same way as I do for my sat nav. Well, actually, I don't for the sat nav now, but I did. Or any other, or your phone, or your laptop. It works in exactly the same way, obviously, but it makes life so much easier. And in many ways, that's what gives it its flexibility. The other thing is that it kind of reduces obsolescence, because nothing is really ever obsolete. Back in those days, back in the day, you had a radio and it was current at the time you bought it, particularly if you bought it new. Although most of the radios I've ever owned, very rarely new, they're mostly secondhand for some reason. I don't know why, I just went that way. But if you bought your radio new, then, what was it, a year or so, maybe a bit less, and then out comes a new model and off you go. You've got to sell it and go and get a new. So I find that the SDR capability reduces that completely, almost, because you have your base unit, which has all your base functions in it, your mixing unit, your analog to digital mixer, your digital synthesis circuitry, and all of that in there. And all that happens is you simply upload or download the new piece of software that you want for whichever part you're upgrading at that particular point in time. There's also, I think, a greater scope for some experimentation. So you can, if you've not experimented with a particular mode, for example, this will give you the capability of doing that. And I know lots of you may be on the call, and I certainly know clubs really big on data modes, as I am. So, it lends itself nicely to data modes. Not always data modes, but it does lend itself well to data modes. And those of you that use data modes will know that again, it is only an opinion, but over phone, you've got much more flexibility to be online, almost, to be transmitting almost, if you wanted to, 24/7. No, I'm not at home at the moment, but if I was, I could have this system here going on. I could be transmitting on another data mode by the side of me regularly, constantly. I could have my other SDR switched into a completely different frequency and be transmitting and receiving on that. I can feed that into my other machine if I want to display it on a pan adapter or whatever I want to do with it. Which you could argue you could do that with a traditional radio. Yes, you can. But you've got to add things to it to be able for it to do that. You've got to have external components to be able to do that. Whereas with modern SDR radios, you don't need any of that whatsoever. And also, as I showed you right at the beginning with the photo, that doesn't look like a radio, just a box, with very few knobs, if you like, with very few buttons on it. But it will more than do the capability of your traditional radio. The other sort of, I think, advantage is this convergence, taking analog signals and digital domains and bringing them together, and therefore giving you much more capability, much more possibility for maybe other modes as well, which in the past you've had to go and find other equipment to do, whereas with your SDR radio, you won't need to do that, because you might find that the digitized signal is enough for it to be able to do the job you want it to. But I think, although it appears at the bottom of this slide, actually this bit here, this greater sensitivity and selectivity of received signal and to some extent transmit signal as well, I think is probably the most noteworthy advantage, because I think especially if you live in high noise areas. Now I don't, I'm really lucky I don't, and some of you guys won't, but if I was trying to operate it here, I'm not, but if I was trying to operate it here in quite a high noise area, it can be horrendous to overcome that noise signal to noise ratio. Whereas if you've got an SDR, it will give you a better chance of receiving the signal and hearing the signal that you want to hear much more cleanly. There's a few more slides, and then I just wanted to sort of touch on some experiences that, as I said, my colleague Andrew has had with his system, particularly around and the antennas that he has, and some of the capabilities to his current SDR radio will also do, which is not really to do with the things I've talked about, but it's actually much more to do with tuning and allowing flexibility around the band. So I'll come on to that in a minute. The interfacing of, sorry, I should ask if anyone's got any questions or just want to talk about anything or ask anything, just pop your hand up or just open your mic and ask away if you want, guys, rather than just let me rabbit on forever. There is a message in the chat. Oh, visitor, sorry guys, visitor. Right. Don't know who that is. Anyway, interfacing. So to interface your radio with your pan adapter, as I said, sound cards and interfaces like that have all gone. Don't need that now. Cat cables are gone, so you don't have to have all of those in order to pick up your screen, for example. It can be Bluetooth. The newer models now can be Bluetooth to screens. assuming you've got good Wi-Fi, that is, of course. Multiple ground loops where we've all suffered that in the shack and the old shack, you know, cables lying around all over the place, looping cables all over the place, potential ground problems that tends to go, because you might have one or two cables at the most, and that's it, and they can be really well routed and really well routed to and from wherever you're going. And different pinouts and connectors and at different levels to some extent have gone as well. It does depend on what you want your SDR to do. So if you still want to mix audio and you've got equalizers and mixers and things like that through your microphone, because obviously you still need a microphone. Well, you don't if you're using data mode, I suppose, but if you're using a phone, you do. Then those haven't gone, because you still need to interface those. But it does depend. But interfacing is simple. Interfacing is as simple with an SDR radio as it is with a laptop. It's literally a plug-in, and there's no real concern about whether I've got the right data cable. Have I got the right fitting? Have I got the right data cable? Have I got the right connector for the other end? Does it fit there? Does it fit that? Or what have you? Virtual cabling. I'm just trying to remember when we wrote these slides quite a few years ago, what we were talking about at the time. Virtual cabling. So you can have virtual lock-ins or lockouts. So I could effectively have a pan adapter with where I am now with some guy on the 3rd floor in this hotel. If we had previously agreed that and we were Bluetooth to each other, there isn't a cable. I'm just really Wi-Fi'd. We've connected through a Bluetooth or through a Wi-Fi network. We haven't connected any other way. So they can be anywhere pretty much. You don't need to worry about the cabling that you might have had to do in traditional forms of radio gear. So it does that alone, I think, is quite an advantage, depending on what you want to do, particularly with remote working. And obviously, if you've got virtual receivers, so I'm receiving signals initially, obviously I want to listen to a station, so there's an audio signal required. But if I just want to initially look at how busy that band is, I can watch multiple bands simultaneously. Now, again, we've been in Wales 3 years, so about 4 years ago now, so I haven't seen Andrew set up in that time. But the last time I went around his place, he had 4 screens, 4 PC screens, CPUs, if you like, sat there, and on one of those screens there were 8 segments. So the screen was divided into 8 mini screens for each band that he was monitoring, so at any one time. So he could switch that off, switch that on. He could take them all off. He could just take them all off and have the only one in the middle that he's watching. He can tell it to pull out individual signals in all of the 8 bands that he's watching and remove the signals in all of the 8 bands he doesn't want to see. So there's so much flexibility, so much more you are able to do, which you wouldn't have been able to do with a traditional radio necessarily. I mean, I say that you could, but it would be much more difficult, and you'd end up having to have, much more equipment around to be able to do it. In terms of filtering, there's, again, you've got this opportunity where you've got really good quality filtering in the form of a mini software program. And that's it. It's a chip, and it will do exactly the same as a traditional filter would. You can actually, and on some, I'm just trying to think of which radio it was, you can actually switch its mode, or it's user definable, so you can actually tell it, this particular filter, what you want that to do, and it will do it. So it's that flexible, it's that changeable, without having to switch it out, which you have to do in a normal radio. Again, because of its flexibility, in the sense that I can just download a new filter if I needed it, or a new type of filter if I needed it, if that was the particular radio I was using, then the software is so much easier to manipulate than having to open up the case and change the filter in another radio, in an all modern sort of traditional, I keep calling them traditional, but I can't think of another word to use, but that a traditional radio, really. Yes, you can work remotely anyway with traditional radios, but with SDR it's so much easier. You literally just have a box that size and that's it. That will work remotely for you. So I could potentially be here in this hotel room working my remote station back home by operating it through a linked program, a linked software program that I tell it what I want it to do and how I want it to operate. So it is completely and utterly remote working in that sense. Some radios will have that capability, particularly new Anon radio. I'll come on to costs and stuff in a bit. We've already said you can see signals and not just hear them, although a lot of the other radios you have got, to be fair, you have got the pan adapter on it, which you can do, but not to the extent that I would say, what's the word I'm looking for? Because the Icom 7300, although it's got SD, when it was sold, I believe, or marketed, it was a software-defined capability. In other words, it has got software-defined circuitry. It's not entirely an SDR radio. Whereas if you go out and buy a traditional SDR radio, an SDR radio, it doesn't do anything else but SDR, then you don't necessarily have your screen there. Your screen is your monitor, which you have on the wall, where my TV is in this room or wherever I want to put it. There are all kinds of, I think most people are probably on the call are familiar with waterfalls and pan adapters. And so again, you can scan the audio spectrum much more easily with a software program than you can in a traditional form. Much more easily with SDR. And some of the new displays are being developed. So a lot of the new developers are coming out all the time with new ways in which you can view your spectrum or view your frequencies that you want to monitor. So yes, there is just as much development of radio in SDR as there are in other traditional radio, just as much. So it's not, I can't sit here and honestly say, well, once you've bought your software defined radio, that's it. You're not going to need to update it. You're not going to need to upgrade it. Because that's not true. I mean, you could be upgrading it just as much as you could a traditional radio. Probably not as often, and maybe not as in the same way. It is as easy as upgrading your Apple iPhone. It really is just as simple as that. And that's another point, actually. A lot of your mobile devices that you use, like your iPhone or your tablet or your laptop, can easily interact with your SDR radio, which it can't always do with a more traditional radio. Yes, you can use cat cabling, you can use you can cable it to your computer or whatever it is you're using, but not so easily. Okay, so for me, that's kind of the advantage, really. It's not necessarily the quality of the signal, but that is partly because it is a very good quality, but also its flexibility for me. So this was quite an old sort of, I can't remember which one this was. It actually does say at the top. I think this was an original pan adapter screen that Andrew used. I can't remember on which radio. I think originally this was, he's upgraded his Anon, which is his SDR radio, about 3 or 4 times. I think this was the original one. And this was when you displayed on your monitor, this is exactly what he sees. So he doesn't, all of the functionality that he has that you'd have on a traditional radio is now on your screen. It's not on a black box. You don't have knobs and buttons and switches and all that. Instead, you have it on your screen, and that's what he had on his. So he could, on the waterfall, he could focus on that signal there and remove all of that completely, pull that right out, and reduce this noise floor right down so he could actually hear it as if the guy sat next to him. This is on 2 meters, but across the spectrum, across whatever frequency he wants to listen to. So instead of having to sort of play about with VSOs and trying to think of another word other than knobs, but you know what I mean, switches, having to play around with switches and things. Instead, you just sort of clicking these bars up and down, and you're clicking on a button, a bit like you do on a computer. All you've got on your desk is just a black box. That's it. Some of the newer ones do have a smaller version of this screen on the box itself. So as you're changing it on your screen, you're also changing it on the box at the bottom. But that's it. That's the simplicity of it. And in fact, it can be turned on and off using the screen as well. So instead of sort of finding, right, where's the off button? There you go, I'm turning it off now. You turn it off on the screen instead. So again, if you had several of these, you could have, as I said, on Andrew's pan adapter or his monitor, he's got eight different, I think it's 8, or it was 8, it's probably more than that now, 8 different bands he's watching, 8 different frequencies he's monitoring all, at any one time. And each one of those can be taken out as in when. It is accurate, so he can hone in on that part of that conversation, that particular, so if I go back a minute, that is what you are receiving. So you can see on the waterfall that signal there, or those stations there. I know there's stations because there's several of them. So that represents probably 3 or 4, maybe even 5 stations there, all pushed very, very close together. What you can do with this, it doesn't show you on this screen, is you can expand the data referencing. So in other words, instead of having it pushed together, you can actually pull it out. So that would be represented sort of like that instead, okay, by pulling that data referencing out. He hasn't done that, he's just left it as it is. But there are about 4 or 5 stations in there. Now there isn't, because he's pulled it out now so you can see it. He's got that reference in there. So that's the station he wants to pick up right there. Okay, now I am supposed to be able to do that on my 7300. I've never actually done it, but it does have, it's meant to have the capability of doing it, but it's not. Yes, it's software defined, as in the DSP units, the analog to data conversion is an SDR conversion, so it does work like that, but it still has a traditional VFO. So I'd still have to sit there and sort of go like that to try and really get that station pinned out, whereas he doesn't have to do that. He can use some of this functionality. Where's my pointer gone? This functionality down here to actually pinpoint with some accuracy as well onto that station. Radio, or a much more accurate receive system. This is quite an old slide because Andrew no longer has his TS990, but he did at the time, and he was trying to do a little bit of a conversion between the selectivity of the both radios, and it was in fact simpler to use. So that's his old radio. He actually sold that a while ago now, but you can see that more of a traditional sort of VFO selectivity with it, you know, if you compare that screen to what you see on here, it really, in terms of functionality, in terms of clean signal, in terms of the accuracy as well, which we don't talk too much about on here, but the accuracy and the cleanliness of the signal transmitted as well is by far better improved using an SDR system than traditional. If you want that, you might not want that. You know, some people don't want that, and that's absolutely fine. This is not a system for everyone. Some people like it, some people don't. So it like Marmite. Some like it, some don't. The small is the new big. Okay, so to give you some idea, I think this was his second or third radio. I can't remember what we're up to now. I think we're up to Anon 14 or something like that now. But at the time, that's the size of it, about the size of about as tall as a Coke can. Okay, and that's it. That's your radio. That's it. It's you know, it will sit in a drawer. And actually, in terms of connectivity, that's the connectivity on the back of the radio. That's on the front of the radio. Okay, so that's your monitor jack, power, obviously headphones. There is a RTTY plug there, and so on and so forth if you want that. But this is the back of the radio, so your antennas, your CPU input, and so on and so forth. But it is small and compact, and amongst other things, above all, it's light as well, which is why a lot of field guys, people who want to do you know, field events and so on and so forth, might go for one of those if they can afford them. Might go for one because they're easy and to carry and compact. And yeah, okay, I suppose you need a monitor, which is not so easy. But I've not come across anyone who's successfully sort of converted the data and Bluetoothed it to their phone screen, but I'm sure that someone has. There shouldn't, in theory, be a reason why you couldn't do that. It depends upon the phone, I suppose, and its capability, its operational capability, to whether you can do that or not. But no reason why you couldn't, as long as it as long as you could, you've got the right functionality on your phone to begin with. So there are many different types, and there's many more than that now. So some are commercial and some are homebrew SDRs. You can make homebrew SDRs for as little as 15, 20 quid. It might even be cheaper than that now. Using these sorts of AirSpy, RTL SDR, FunCube, etc., etc. Many kits as well. There's lots of SDR kits, which a lot of groups, kids, Cub Scouts, you name it, they have a go at, and build-a-thons have a go at making. The major two, Anon and Flex Radio. Andrew started off with an Anon, and he's then moved on to Flex Radio. These are the SDR kits available. They can be cheap or expensive, but they are. It says, but it's always significantly cheaper than traditional radios. I don't want to cast aspersions. I don't know what you guys spend on a radio. Being me, I'm not going to lie. I bought my 7300 quite cheaply. It wasn't new, it was second hand, but only because it had sat on the shelf. I didn't pay the thousands that they were when they came out. But if you compare the cost of, say, the latest Kenwood, which is not an SDR radio, although a lot of them now have SDR capability built in. But if you were to go for, a radio of that type or a similar, couple of thousand, maybe 1,500, $2,000, something like that, but an SDR radio, Flex Radio, something like that system we looked at when he bought his, was about £3,500. The latest radio that he's got now, the Flex Radio, cost him £5,500, which you might go, oh, Christ. I know a lot of people who spend a lot more than that on traditional kits, but that radio for £5,500 will pretty much do everything apart from make the tea. And it's about that size, and it will, because he can use it across a multi-band, so you can do HF, VHF, UHF on it. One of the things I did want to tell you about some of the more modern Flex, more recent Flex radios, is that if you use, so he uses his system with a loop. If you use a loop system, or a magnetic loop, he's got a separate tuning unit that comes with the Flex radio. So it's a Flex radio tuning unit. It's not an external tuning unit radio. It comes with a unit. It comes with the radio. It will actually automatically tune to the band he's on. So it will automatically tune where he is. So essentially, he's got, well, it's not a dipole, because a loop's not a dipole really. But if you think about it in dipole terms, he's got basically a dipole for every possible frequency you could have, because it will just tune it. So if he turns, if he wants his radio to operate on, 20 meters, 14, well, hardly ever, but 14.28, whatever it is, he just, puts that in to the radio. So he inputs it on the front of the radio, and it will automatically tune that to that frequency without him going anywhere. And it will do that on pretty much any frequency band he wants to work on. So yes, it's like a tuning unit, but what it's doing is it's automatically, I did warn you about the noise, it's automatically allowing him to take, to get that level of selectivity out, really, or that level of efficiency out. So, but it's not cheap. Those units aren't cheap. So it does really depend on what you want to do. There is an argument. I've heard some people say that it takes the fun out a bit, because you know the fun bit is actually trying to tune your radio. Most of what it is for me anyway, trying to tune your radio sometimes, and to get the best possible setup you can. So kind of the argument is it takes the fun out of that a little bit, because you just press a button and it's done. But when you don't want that, when you want ultimate sort of flexibility and ability to be able to work at multi-band, then it gives you that over any other system. Okay, so I would definitely recommend people go and have a look at what this can do. It's hang on, I think there's another screen. Yeah. So some of the old school SDRs did have some. This was an old Flex radio, the very first Flex radio system that does have knobs and whistles on it, and you can tune manually through the VFO rather than selecting it through a data input. So yeah, you can do that. You can use your knobs and not your computer if you wish, or a computer if you wish. And I can't remember, it's not Flex Radio, but I can't remember which manufacturer it was. Might have been Annan, that's one of them anyway, who recognized that there was a group of people out there that still wanted the tactile thing of knobs and whistles and switches. And so they produced their latest radio that does have the capability of either doing it through data input and selecting your frequencies you want to listen into or operate on that way, or you can do it traditionally with a VFO and selecting your and switching in a notch filter or not, or switching in a high pass, a band pass filter or what. It will let you do that if you still want to go old school, but it's an SDR radio. Don't ask me what the cost is, I don't know, probably quite expensive for that, because you've got two systems running side by side, I would think. But it's possible. Not sure what that is actually. I'm not quite sure what that slide was there for, so I'm going to skip past that and come back to it. That was pretty much it, because I didn't have much in this one, because as I said, it was just a basic introduction really to what this can do and what it is. But you know, I would recommend that if you aren't familiar with software-defined radio, even in its basic form, go and have a little look at it. Take a look at it online, because there's lots of tutorials around that online, and just find out a little bit about what it can do. And even if you have a little play with your traditional radio that you've got at home, and you add an SMI or some other SDR dongle to it, just to have a little play around with receiving and transmitting a few signals that way, and see how you get on. But I know that there's been a criticism that, you know, SDR or even data modes aren't real radio. It's not proper radio, you know, unless you actually pick the microphone up and speak to somebody. And now that is one view, but it's not totally like that. I think for me, it has always been about communication. So it's always been about what this hobby to me is about, communicating with other people. It doesn't matter how we're doing it by Zoom tonight. So it doesn't matter that it's a communication mode. If this is largely data, which it is, then so be it, you know. If it's not, it's not. You know, as I've said already, you can switch into analog mode, so you don't actually have to always be transmitting using data modes through SDR. You can do it analog way, it reconverts the signal, so that's absolutely fine. It just really does depend what you want to do with it. So any questions, guys?
How do you work this in a contest?
Well, you can set it up so that it will automatically send your transmission on different frequencies at any given time. So it can. It's an interesting one actually, Danny, because you could argue it's not cheating, but sort of, because you're, especially if you're weak signal contesting. So if you're trying to pick up signals that are, you know, very, very weak, and attempt to, you know, communicate with them, then there is an argument that actually using a software-defined radio is cheating, because it's attenuating what other people can't do. And it's selecting your signal over other people, really. But I don't know. I think that it can, you know, you can. So for example, you could have your screen with your 8 frequencies, 8 bands that you're listening to, transmitting us the same signal, the same message on all 8 at the same time, or at different
You're not
times.
allowed to do that.
No, but you could if you wanted to.
Well, technically you could if you wanted to, but I know Steve G.I. tried one, and well, he's gone back to a 7300 actually.
Yeah.
Stewart, I think, tried one as well, but like me,
an SDR.
Yeah.
An SDR. Yeah.
Like me, he's gone back to a K3.
Yeah.
Which I think, if I'm right, has got an SDR innards in it. It'll do a lot of things in SDR.
It will do, yeah. Most of them do now, yeah. But I mean, you know, most of these models do have that capability definitely in it. Yeah. I just you know, I suppose if I was at home for ease of operation, I mean, I'm not a contester, you know, so you've asked the wrong person really, because I'm not interested. But if you are, then yeah, I guess it will. It can give you possibly an edge, in the sense that you can pull out those weaker signals, but not necessarily. So you know, yeah. I mean, that to me is how I would want to use it, but not everyone really.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Danny. Any other questions, guys?
No. Oh, well.
I bored you all.
No, I haven't got a question, but I enjoyed that. But I've got a bloody light is coming in through my window again, giving me a halo. I use an SDR dongle, purely for receive.
Yeah.
And it's great fun. But with this thing, I can watch Freeview TV on my tablet. As well as SDR radio, and I find I'm enjoying it very much on the receive, basically as a shortwave listener device, you know.
Yeah, a lot of people have said that to me, that it's what we forget is that we think that SDR appears as something that, you know, you need to know an awful lot about and actually be very technical to operate. That's not the case at all. Some of these kits are very, very simple. What it actually does is it gives access to people that probably wouldn't think of it. Like you said, you can be watching your TV. I can be, you know, doing something on my laptop and have a little window open with an SDR playing in the background.
That's right.
At the same time, well, assuming I've got good Wi-Fi. If I tried to do that at home, it'd probably be a waste of time. But back here it would be. But you know, so it does give people the capability of getting onto radio that they wouldn't all ordinarily be able to do. So for that reason, I kind of like it. And yeah, you can go out and spend $5.5 grand on the latest, you know, flex radio that'll make the tea and your dinner and everything else, as well as do the job. But at the same time,
or 15 quid, and you can listen to any band you like.
15 quid an airspray or
I think I'm using RTL SDR.
RTL. Yeah.
I'm lucky enough to have a coil of very thin copper wire, cloth-covered copper wire from the Second World War on a wooden bobbin. So I pretty much just throw that out the window, sticking into that, and you know, I can waste hours just trying to find something, you know, and it's great fun. It's great fun. So thank you for that, Mark.
Yeah, it is. It is good fun, and like now, I mean, I've got one at home. I just don't bring with me now. But I could just sling it out the hotel window. Probably not where I am because I'm not terribly high up, and I've got a lot of metal around me, so it's probably not going to do very well. But I could just sling it out the window, and you know, away I go, and nobody knows what the heck I'm doing. I can plug it into my laptop, and there it is. It's running around.
There we go.
And you can do that. And so some of these, you'll see some of these guys with buildathons actually building this kit up all the time. And if you wanted to, you could buy individual components and make your SDR radio up yourself if you knew what you needed to do. In much the same way as you could build a computer if you know what you're up to.
Yeah.
It'll do exactly the same job, really. But as I say, for me, it's about selectivity and sensitivity on receive more so than transmit. Transmit, the advantages are the tuning capability on your antenna system, particularly if you're using loops, magnetic loops, which have, you know, as you know, high IQ, very narrow band. It will give you that capability. That's probably it. It will clean the signal up, so it's there's no spurious emissions going out of your signal when you transmit. But on receive, it can really be a fantastically clear signal. I mean, I shan't forget the first time I heard the signal out of the 7300, and that's just sitting on the desktop, you know. And I turned the radio on, and wow, I thought, crikey, what the hell is that? You know, compared to the old Yaesu sat next to me, and they're sort of crackling away, and then this thing that just sounds beautiful was the word I would use to describe it. And that's 7300 is considered quite old technology now in today's terms. I don't know what's the latest model now. Is it 9600 or something like that? What's the latest one?
I don't know. I can't afford it regardless.
Yeah. $2,000 or something.
Yeah.
But,
is it 101 or something?
Like that? I don't know.
10 or something, I don't know.
Yes, yeah, Icon 96 something or other now, but you know, so that's the capability of SDR, the transference of analog into digital, and then digitizing it, filtering it, sampling it, taking things out, putting things in, sending it back out. It's got so much more capability. Any other questions, guys?
Well, what we use it mostly, I suppose, is Hack Green, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, Web SDR.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty guilty of that.
Yeah, I mean, don't confuse. I mean, I'm talking about a radio architecture. I'm not necessarily talking about mode. So data mode is a mode of transmission, you know, whereas I'm talking about radio architecture. So just because you've got an SDR, you know, an SDR radio can still transmit in a normal mode. It can still transmit as an analog mode. Okay. Yes, so digital transmissions, yes, it will obviously be much more sensitive and much more selective with those, because it doesn't have to do much more filtering. It doesn't have to do as much filtering with those signals as it does with an analog signal, which it has to convert. So there are some advantages over that, but that's maybe another talk.
Well, I've often used Hack Green. I've got Hack Green running here usually when I'm doing a contest. I can see where they are on it, and I can also see on the band plan on the N1MM. And
well, that's why
sometimes you can hear them better on Hack Green than you can in your own wireless, especially from
that's why you can see. It's more visual. You can see what's going on. You can make your decisions based on what you see rather than what you hear. And the human ear, although it's very sensitive, is not as sensitive as that software can be anywhere near. So that's that. So if I don't know if I've converted anybody, have I? I don't know. I'm not here to do that, but maybe I have. I don't know if there's anybody out there. Sort of diode black boxes.
We'll find out when they put the pictures of the new radios on Facebook, I think, Mark. That was a very interesting talk. I quite enjoyed it, actually.
Okay, good.
So, you know,
Okay.
very good, very good.
No problem, no problem at all. I know it's a bit shorter, but that was
don't worry.
I'd done that as a presentation as part of another course, but yeah, I have got others, but they go into a little bit more detail into how the sort of the digital processing takes place.
Well, if nobody else got any question, maybe we can get away from the screen sharing and
yeah, sorry,
see the ugly mugs all together. Like, oh, there's a
Hey,
few.
there we are.
Yeah, there's only a few was left, but some have had to go away. Like things like that. The diehards are here in any case. I think this window Simon's is proving to be rather a problem, actually. But, oh, go. Oh, bugger. But there we are. I didn't know dog's claws could. I didn't know dog's claws could scratch glass.
Oh yeah.
To be honest with you, because
I've
got a window. Well, it's not near, it's by the stairs, and my dog lives on that window most of the time. And you know, he just scratched the window, and there's no marks on it. So what the hell it was, I don't know. But there are some nasty little ferrets going around with all sorts of things in their hand, aren't there? That's the thing. There we are. Yeah. Anybody got one to talk about? Martin? Has Martin fallen asleep there? No, he hasn't.
Again, no.
Yeah, were you talking to some woman or other there, Martin?
No, Jack.
Yeah. Oh, Jack, was it?
Marty, I must say I'm impressed again. You stayed. No, that was great.
No, it wasn't boring at all. I quite enjoyed it, actually. So don't worry about it. Anything that any people can sit down here and talk about, it's not as easy as you think, to be honest with you. You know, you can spend a few hours preparing stuff and you actually get it. I've done it. I've done a presentation or something for something or other, and then I've read it all out and find there's only 10 minutes worth then. I think, what the bloody hell am I going to tell them now when the presentation's only 10 minutes long, like, but we always manage to get something out to it. That's the main thing.
Yeah. It is a hard subject. I mean, because it's, unless you are comfortable with software developing and that sort of area where you're familiar with, switching in and out of circuits and changing up, chips and things to enable you to make your system run faster or receive more or whatever. It can be a bit daunting, but I think it's a great area.
Yeah. Well, I know the Elecraft I've got here, well, not so much with this one now, because this is the K3. Of course, they come out with the K3S, and then they come out with the K4 now, which is I think ready for shipping, I think. But I know with this one, to download, you used to be able, attach it to a computer, and it was there. 10 minutes later, you could put a complete new system in it. Which had updated everything you want to. And if you told Wayne Burdick that, for instance, there was one, there's a blind person said to him, well, I can't see the radio. Can he do anything about it? Well, 24 hours later, he actually made the K3 talk. And I can make this one talk to me now if I want to. It'll tell me all the things I want to know, like frequency and everything like this.
Well, this is it. I mean, the latest sort of...
They can do those sorts of things, can't they?
We're about to get the Sky bloke come around. I mean, I'm obviously not at home this week, but he's coming around to deliver the new Sky box, which now is voice activated. So, you can sit there and go, BBC One, and off it goes. It's going to be absolutely amazing when the dog barks. I can't wait for this, because there's going to be I'm going to have to come up with some sort of, what's the word? Not analog. Some algorithm whereby it recognises the dog's bark.
Well,
when it barks, it changes the channel or something. I
think my daughter's got one of these. What is it? You talk to it. You can buy it in Alexa. Well, Alexa's told me straight that she doesn't like me. I thought, what have I done to upset her? Like, and she'll talk to everybody else, but she just told me I don't like you, and won't even recognize my voice. Like, so, you know,
Yeah. So
I'm not very popular.
There's so many things you can do. It's endless, really, to be honest. However, having said that, a lot of this, particularly like I said in the presentation, if you want to throw up your frequency charts on a pan adapter onto your TV, you can only do that if you've got reasonable Wi-Fi and you can Bluetooth it. You know, otherwise you can't. You know, you're back to your data cable again, which is the fallback. But then you've got your cabling that looks pretty untidy. So all of this relies on connectivity. Without connectivity, it just won't work. So I don't think we need to forget that. If you haven't got the connectivity, then you're back to the traditional, really, in almost always.
There was an amateur around here. He used to have lots of screens in his shack and be connected. Whoever wants to watch a 52-inch SWR meter, I don't know, but
no.
You know,
when I can't find my glasses, I could do with one of those.
But that's when you have to do that sort of thing, I think becomes completely pointless. You know, the only thing I've got running on the screen is N1MM, and you know, Hack Green, of course, comes on this one when I'm doing it.
Well, I can remember a time not that long ago when you did, SWR or the SWR, I didn't bother with. You just got out your field strength meter and hope for the best.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Am I putting out a signal because so what?
Well, yeah. Well, I don't bother with it now. You know, with the Helica, for instance, it remembers the whole lot. So, you know, it does it all automatic. Don't even look at the blasted thing. But they brought programs out to do it and things like that. But I've got the little dongle things, an RTL one, I think it is. And I've got an up converter, I think, or a down converter, all in a box in the far end there. I used to have them on, but I don't know what it was actually. I think I had needed the screen for something else, and they had to go to one side.
You do tend to find that people run out of visual.
Yeah.
Tools that you need another screen or another screen to run that on, unless you can split your screens, and then people can't always do that. Although Windows 11 will be coming out soon, that can do that as standard, which you can't do at the moment. You can tile your screen and you can do all sorts with it, but it's very hard to split it. But Windows 11 apparently will let you do that, I think. So.
Well, Windows XP was a brilliant program, but they don't support it anymore, do they? No. But
anyway. Yeah. Towards the end of XP, to be fair, they nailed it. It just ran and worked, and it was brilliant. I skipped 7 and 8. I'm using 10 now, but I usually use Linux most of the time these days. But some of the applications I have in work are Windows based, and I have to fire up into Windows, but I usually use Linux.
Windows drives me up the wall.
Yeah.
It's just the most. I mean, I'm an Apple man, so I will not use. I have a Windows.
It's also for people hook on to what they like, and it's what it courses.
Yeah. As you know, a lot of PAM software won't run on Mac OS. It will.
Yeah.
So you have to have a Windows